Welcome to Leadership and Execution. Today's podcast is about the art of goals and focus. I recently saw a great movie, Ford versus Ferrari, with Matt Damon and Christian Bale. It's a true story based in the 1960s. It was about Ford Motor Company and Ferrari. Ford in 1962 was really slumping in their sales. They needed some way to boost their sales. Their cars were stale. They were losing market share to GM and Chrysler. Lee Iacocca, whom we've all heard of, was at the time working at Ford, and he suggested to Henry Ford II that we need a car that's appealing to today's generation. We need a car that's fast, we need a car that's sexy, a car that looks good, and Ford had neither. And so they did like most companies do. Who has it? They said, Ferrari. Let's go buy Ferrari. At the time, Enzo Ferrari, sales was pitched to him for $10 million for his company. He's having some financial problems. And so he liked the offer, except there was one problem, is that he would have to give up control of the motorsports division, and that was his baby, and he would not do it. And he became angry, he was offended. There was a $10 million offer on the table, but then he said Henry Ford can't hold a candle to his grandfather, the cars are ugly, the plants are ugly, and insulted everyone there, and Henry Ford II was furious. So he said, we'll build our own car. And that's where the GT40s came. But they needed someone who could help design the car. They had engineers, so they reached out to the legendary car designer, Carroll Shelby, who was played by Matt Damon. Shelby took the existing engineers and all the resources they had internally, which is a critical point. What resources they currently have, and then what do you need to go outside to help you to win? They began to work on the race car, and they needed a test driver, someone who had a good feel for a car, someone who could really drive the car and come back and work with the engineers and tell them what was off and what wasn't right, what didn't feel good. And he had a friend named Ken Miles, played by Christian Bale in the movie. He hired him to be the test driver. So for a year, they developed the car. They took it to the 24-hour Le Mans. That is the race of all races. Ferrari dominated it. Now, I should say that Carroll Shelby, one reason they reached out to him, he was the only American who had won the 24 hours of Le Mans, or at least one of them. And so he had some experience. But they knew that if they could go in and compete with Ferrari in the Le Mans, the 24 hours of Le Mans, that they could begin to sell more cars, meaning that people would buy the GT40 series. So they take the car the first year. There was one problem. They didn't even finish. They were embarrassed, humiliated. Ferrari won again. But something had happened. Ken Miles, who had been hired, who was the test driver, who really had a feel for the car, he was not allowed to go. Internally, convinced Henry Ford that he shouldn't go because the cars that they had built turned out to be unstable and unreliable, but Ken Miles was also unstable and not reliable. He was emotionally unstable, so to speak, and so they was afraid that he would go and embarrass Ford Motor Company and Henry Ford. Well, they were embarrassed. Matt Damon comes back, Shelby comes back and says, look, we got to take my guy with me, Ken Miles. So he was convinced that he would go with him. Now, the movie shows it happening in a year, but in reality, it was within a couple of years. They took the cars to the 24-hour Le Mans, and Ford finished 1, 2, and 3. Dominated the race. Ferrari was embarrassed. They didn't even finish that year. So the message today that we have for you is this power of a goal of where you're maniacally focused. Henry Ford, he was driven and focused because he was angry, but he was maniacally focused. And what he did is put all the resources that he had around it. He took anything and everything he had. He put this tremendous capital outlay into building this sports car. And so the maniacal focus. And then he needed two things for it to be successful. He needed the right car, brought on Carroll Shelby, the right person. He needed the right driver, didn't know that at first, but when they brought on Ken Miles, they won. But the idea is that once you see what you want to do, which is the goal is 24-hour Le Mans to beat Ferrari. That's what we want to accomplish. How you get there is a whole different matter. So as they go to work, you can just imagine the overall goal of winning the 24-hour Le Mans. But there was a number of teams that had to make that happen. So each one of those teams had to have a goal. And as each of those teams had a goal, all of those goals would align with the overall goal of winning the 24-hour Le Mans. As I go around the world and work with companies and teams on building execution plans on their goals and on their strategies, we see a disconnect, a misalignment. Data shows that only 11% of a workforce knows what the organizational goal even is. That's frightening. So you have heads down people that working every day in the organization. They don't even know what the goal is. They just come in, they put their head down, they work hard. What if we could articulate, communicate, and include everyone down to the lowest level of the organization, down to the frontline employees? They know what the organizational goal is, and then they have teams they work in. And with those teams, they have goals. And the goals that they have aligns with their department goals. The department goals aligns with a division goal. The division goal aligns with the organizational goal, or however many layers one might have in there. Think of the power in that. And that misalignment that I see in these teams that I work with. So we narrow the focus. What do we want to go after? And then we start to build our plan, and then we build an execution plan on the goal, and then we start to run the play, so to speak. So the idea in the movie clearly illustrates is know what you want to accomplish and get the right people there. We've all heard the saying that you get the right people on the bus, but it goes further than that. As we saw in the movie, you get the right people in the right seats on the bus, and then you win. You get everyone pulling together, working toward the common goal, and then you win. Now, the disconnect that I see with teams is not only do they not know what the goal is, they don't know how to get to the goal. So now we have this staging, if you will, where you take this goal of the organization and you've cascaded it down through the organization so there's alignment. That's the what. Every team has a what. And now we got to figure out how to get there. Well, how is the art? The art of identifying those crucial and critical things that help you accomplish your goal. I would call them behaviors. So knowing what you're going after, which is the goal, is so important. As I was running my businesses, I knew what we wanted to accomplish, but we just couldn't get there. It was very frustrating for me, and we're just not doing the things we need to do to get there. And I've seen it with the teams that I work with as I travel in consulting. And I came across a wonderful book several years ago that just changed the way I viewed it all. It said, this is the missing piece. And it's a book about execution, the discipline of getting things done. There's a quote in here that maps in this leadership. So as you look at leadership and execution, they are inseparable. You cannot have leadership without execution. You can't execute without good leadership. Here's the quote. Leadership without the discipline of execution is incomplete and ineffective. Without the ability to execute, all other attributes of leadership become hollow. We've all seen these organizations where they hire this high-powered CEO, and he or she comes into the organization, and a few years later, they're fired. They leave with these multi-million-dollar golden parachutes. Why? They didn't accomplish anything. They failed, and yet they walk away with these packages. We spend billions of dollars on leadership, and we virtually showed no improvement. And so this missing piece is the ones who can come into an organization, one, they have a vision, they're clear on what they want to accomplish, they can inspire their people, they include them, they listen to them, they get them engaged, and then they execute, and then they get the outcomes. That's rare. We here at Leadership and Execution call it the art of getting things done. So I believe it's more of an art than a science. I love data. I've always liked data. We went from not long ago of gathering data, big data, and then we got to, okay, we've got all this data, what do we do with it? So now there's a whole industry there of these data analytics where people can look at that data, they can tell a story. Everyone uses the data now. Manage to the data, I'm a big believer in it. But it goes beyond that, and this is where the art comes in. The leadership, good leadership, has to be able to get their teams to engage and buy in. We can show them the data, but if they don't know how to identify what behaviors they need to do, or they don't know how to work together as a team, or they're not motivated, they're not engaged, there's not buy-in, they weren't included in the process of identifying goals, if we just hand them to them, because that's what we've always done, right? We just hand them a goal, and then it's really your goal, not their goal. I've been guilty of it myself. I've seen it over and over with the organizations that we work with. That's why I call it an art. If you want to learn more how to win, how to get your teams engaged, how to get your teams working together to stay motivated, to have wins after win after win. If you want to learn more how to reduce turnover because of this environment of winning, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, our YouTube channel, and our podcast.